going through a procedure now to peel these poles, which involves just making 2 tripods in which we're going to rest the poles while they got the bark on them, and then we'll peel them down and skin them. It's also the same procedure used to set up the teepee itself. In other words, when the poles are all peeled and trimmed and cured, they'll be lashed together in the same fashion. The teepee poles that we're working on are all white pines, except for one beautiful little spruce pole that was growing there among the white pines today, so we cut that. And it's really outstanding, and they're good white pine poles too. Not very tough poles, really. White pine's very soft wood, but as a result, Carol will have an easier time of it when it comes to shaving down all those knots. One thing that we want to generally avoid with teepee poles are the so-called hard woods. We're talking now about the broadleaf trees, or the deciduous trees that are all around us here, oaks and beeches and ashes and hickories, maples. Those poles you could resort to for teepee poles, but you really don't want them. You want the conifers, the cone-bearing trees, the ones that ordinarily we call evergreens. All right? The white pine is the softest among these, and in this area, the hardest species would be the cedar, the red cedar, which is actually juniper, but we call it aromatic cedar. When you're actually raising the tripod on the teepee, there's some fixed rules, and that is that the door pole is always on top and on your left as you stand here at the lashing and look toward the butts. Don't get confused and stand at the butts and look up toward the lashing. Remember, you're standing here. The door pole is always on the top and always on your left. And when you're working alone, you can take it and put it up on one knee like this and tie that clove hitch, and your north and your south pole have their butts. Okay. Their butts to your right. Okay. There's our clove hitch again, and we'll take our surplus and come around a couple of times. We got enough? Yeah, we could just tie this on a square knot, actually. Maybe even half bow. Okay, now, the door pole is facing to the east. The butts of the north and south pole are to the south and the west. And so you raise this up and balance it, and this would be the north pole. You walk backwards with it like this. Okay, and there's that tripod. Now, let's spread them apart a little bit. And Ben, would you bring us a fresh pole, please? We've got points on the butt so that it can kind of seat itself. Have you got your draw knife handy?
Yeah.
There's one right there.
Well, not because it's just going to confuse it, but because you get a smoother surface
By doing it right.
by just peeling it like a banana, see? And the only place you need the draw knife for is to trim the knots down flush. That butcher knife of Ben's is really the ideal tool for what you're doing, Carolyn, because a folding knife like that, you'll loosen up the joint, prying with it, you know. In other words, what you're doing right there is you're ruining your knife. Because see, with a pocket knife, there's a pin in there that holds that blade, and when you give it this kind of action on it, you're causing that knife to wobble in there. You're bending that fitting, and so it's good to just use a one-piece steel butcher knife like that old hickory knife of Ben's. Is the perfect tool for this. And either before or after you peel the bark, there you go. Now try working that under there. Both of them, 2 good ones. Very good. Here's what I prefer to peel knots, to do knots on most of these. Some people like to draw a knife, but I like to get the hand axe real sharp. You can't do it either with it, well, you can, but it just butchers up the pole. But if you got a good edge on it, you come along and you cut halfway in from one side, like that, and then halfway from the other, and then the knot doesn't split out, right?
I was noticing today that's a much better way.
If you got a sharp draw knife, you can do it either way. Whichever tool, it's important to have a good edge on it.
long do they have to season?
Depends on the weather. Probably if you had a straight week of weather just like this, they would be 90% seasoned. Probably 10 days for good measure. But just a couple of rainy days in there could double that. So you need to figure maybe 20 days. You could put the cloth on it after 10 days of fairly sunny weather, though. If you put
what would happen if you put the cloth on it and they were still wet?
well, for one thing, you'd get
warp?
They could sag and warp, and you'd also probably get the pine pitch on the cloth, which wouldn't be a great disaster, but it would make it kind of gummy and black. You know, it would
Like your hands.
to put yeah, just like our hands are right now. See, so it'd be good to wait till all that pitch is settled out, and that'll take you at least a week or 10 days, and maybe 2 or 3 weeks.
And this is like June, which is like the best time to get poles,
This is
right?
the best time to do it. Yeah, June and July.
Would you say that, like, this is satisfactory for like rainproofing, or does like
Fairly so. I would maybe take and come back with a sharper knife later on and trim that up a little bit. You want the knots perfectly flush. See, you don't want, in other words, you want that the same level as the rest of it, and this area tends to bulge a little bit, right?
and both sides it tends to hollow out.
That's right, and so little knots like that aren't much of a problem. But what I would perhaps do is come back later. White pine is so soft that you can take a pocket knife or something and come back and trim up any little rough places. What we're dealing with here is a Sioux style teepee, which is basically the same as the Cheyennes. And it's a 3-pole foundation. Every tribe has its own slight variations. But what we're talking about here is probably the sturdiest in the judgment of most who experiment with these things. The Sioux method of tying the tripod starts off with a clove hitch, which has a lot of other applications in the camping process, but particularly where teepees are concerned. We've marked the poles in advance because the points at which they lash are rather critical. You might want to come in here with your camera now and get this clove hitch.
I've got it real fine.
Okay? This is basically it right there. And it comes together like this. Because we're setting up this teepee on this wooden platform, I'm going to go just a little bit higher on my lashing than we did last time. This teepee was set up right on the ground, right on the earth. But this platform raises us several inches off the ground, and so I suppose I should come up just a few inches higher with this to compensate for that. Now we'll tighten up on this framework before we raise it by swinging the door pole back around. Paul, could you take the door pole back to its place now to tighten up on the lashing, please? Maybe even a little bit beyond its natural place till we get it up. All right, here we go. On a 3-pole foundation, the general symmetry is more on a 4-pole foundation, and we're going to stack this north side first and then the south side, but this first pole that we stack in here comes out and squares the door, whereas when we start stacking this side we immediately start dropping back. And what we want now is to get our next heaviest pole in the set. Jay, would you bring a medium heavy one next?
No, I remember that.
I was using that to make pipes. Uh-huh.
How do you know where to place the pole?
Well, there's a fairly simple system. As I say, we're using that used by the Sioux and Cheyenne. And you start on the north side of the door pole and stack your filler poles. Now, a Sioux or Cheyenne teepee will always have a total number of poles in its frame, which is a multiple of 3. For an 18-foot teepee such as this, generally we use 15 poles. For teepees less than 18 feet, usually we use 3 fewer poles. So teepees smaller than this have a 12-pole frame, but here we're working with a 15-pole frame, so that means 4 poles in between each tripod pole. And there's 1 more to go, right? On this end. Yeah, 1 more, James. And what we're doing is starting on the north of the door pole and laying 4 poles in this front crotch, and then we'll move over to the south side and put 4 more poles right on top of these. Take them in order of heaviness. Stacking the south side to put the poles slightly forward of their final position until after we get the rope wound around there, and this keeps them from slipping forward. There's a tendency for them to want to kick forward, so yeah. So you move them toward the front initially, and then we'll fan them back a little bit more. Okay, so that's the 4 on this side now, right? Or that's just, yeah, that's all 4 of them. Now, if you come right here with your camera, Dean, you can see where there's a nice little gap left in the rear of the tripod now, where all these 4 poles stack from back here. And you start here again to the north to lay the first one in. And then this other one along beside it. Now in here we're going to skip a little place for the lifting pole. Right, move on around even more, yeah, about there. Now this
one's still going in the same crotch.
It still goes in the same crotch, and we'll have to reshift the poles after we get the rope wound around. And I'm not so sure that we've got this tripod pole in the right place here. Paul might have been.
Yeah, it's this one here.
A while ago, Paul.
It's this one. It's a bigger
Paul perceived something, and I told him he was wrong, and it's me who is wrong. That one should have come back, and those can stay just like that for now. But now it's ready to wind. The basis of your structure, which tilts backwards, you see, by having that longer pole in front, it makes everything lean backward. And your final floor plan, which is kind of an egg-shaped pattern, is actually determined by the cover. When the poles are placed outward against the cover, it will naturally assume that shape. And to initially place and space your poles is largely a matter of judgment that comes with experience. And it's hard to give you a real pat answer about how and why you do it. You have to just experiment with it a little bit. Usually now we start out at the south pole on our tripod. Stand on the outside, get the rope between you, step backwards through the rope. Right, okay. Why don't you hold the coil in your left hand and pull with your right?
Doesn't work.
Keep moving. Okay. Now, one thing that I'll mention as a matter of caution is that the tripod should always be, the rope should be pulled tight only from the front, because it's from this direction that it's virtually impossible to pull the frame down on you. If you pull it from the back or even from the side, it's possible that you can pull the frame over.
These are going up to the truck, right?
Huh?
These are going up the road.
Yeah. Okay, now that completes it. So the tradition is to wind it around from east to west 4 times. And this is actually 4 2/3. So I'm going to go back over the north pole. Go back east while you get. Now we can spread these poles more into their final position.
As the smoke descends upon us.
Smoke is doing weird stuff.
Really?
The mosquitoes away anyway,
Really?
right? Perfect timing.
Just as our tripod poles were pre-marked, I've also pre-marked the 4th key pole in this arrangement. That's the lifting pole, that which the cover is tied to in order to raise it up on the frame. And by this little painted band here, I know to tie the tie flap right here. And I have a continuous piece, I have a piece of cotton rope through there that I'll wrap in opposite directions.
The center poles you tied a little higher than that band though, right?
Yes, I did, Dean. Thank you for reminding me. Going to just slide up an inch or two to allow for the floor. In a situation like this, I always want to tie it in a square bow, that is a square knot with bow loops in the ends, so that it'll come out real easy when you want it to, and yet it's tight enough so that it shouldn't slip. Wires should come off the pole. Balancing the cover on the top, I come up to it, the whole arrangement is balanced vertically, and then I give it a half a twist to put the cover on the outside. And then I lower it into that waiting space up there, which you can pretty much tell. It's alright. Okay. Now, Andrea,
Yeah.
would you like to put this after the cover and move it around?
Let's see. I think.
Let's go ahead and get it right here by the door. Okay. I'm about to put the lacing pins up the front, and we'll probably have a little bit of difficulty that we ordinarily wouldn't have if we were just putting the teepee up directly on the earth, because in that situation we would place the poles slightly in from their final position. And here, maybe we can do something here. Maybe we can get a little bit. What I'm trying to say is that by going ahead and spreading the poles out in their final position as determined by the perimeter of the floor, the cover doesn't have a little bit of slack which you'd ordinarily need to get it together, especially on a rainy day like this, where the canvas tends to shrink up anyway. We could try this, just bringing the poles in a little bit.
And then putting them out when it's done.
Yeah, that's what we ordinarily on the working on the earth, we wouldn't have any problem like this, getting the cover to meet down the front. It's the difference when it's wet like this. Don't get this on film. Now with this type of teepee, we're putting in lacing pins from the right side, and the left side laps over from the outside. And this helps you in a situation like we're in right now to get a little bit of leverage between the holes. The lacing pin passes through all 4 holes. First the outer one on the top side, then through the 2 underneath, and then back through the top side. We really don't have a complete set of lacing pins here this evening, but we'll have enough to get by, and we'll go make a few. I'll skip this one for right now because this is the one that the door hangs from. The second set above the door.
What's that sponge thing there?
This is a new modern addition to the teepee.
Hey, Tipi baby. Hey, my little man. What's going on around here? Huh? What's going on? Now, a lot of people who first observe the teepee are quite concerned about how you keep the rain from coming in up at the top. And these poles right here are one of the keys. By manipulating these poles, you can pretty much close out the rain and the snow and still have a fire inside and have the smoke go out. And sometimes it's a little bit tricky spearing the pocket. But since you got a big kid helping you, do it every time. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Now these poles are placed according to the wind direction, and the idea is to always maneuver them so that the hole is facing away from the prevailing wind. And of course, if you're not going to have a fire, you can close them up altogether.
Okay.
the length of these poles is rather critical. The common mistake a lot of teepee campers make is to have them too long. They need to be within a certain range, ideally so that the butt hits the ground about 1.5 feet or so when placed at center back. Bring this one back a little bit. And that's of course how you'd have to, that's where you would place them to have the hole just moderately open. Now we still have to peg it down and pull all these wrinkles out. But first we're going to install the lining, and then we'll come back and put the pegs in, and these wrinkles that you see now will stretch out.
Baba! Baba! Baba!